The late afternoon sun beat down on Dry Creek Valley like a hammer on an anvil, turning the dust to powder and the air to something you had to chew before breathing. Evelyn Cross stood at the edge of the corral, one boot propped on the lowest rail, watching another man get himself nearly killed. His name was Dutch Morrow, a loud, barrel-chested drover from Wyoming who'd ridden in 3 days ago with a grin wide enough to split his face and a confidence that could fill a canyon. He'd announced to anyone who'd listened that he'd broken more horses than most men had ridden, that this black devil everyone was whispering about was nothing more than a tall tale wrapped around an ornery gelding, and that come sundown, he'd be walking away with Evelyn's money and probably her hand in marriage too, if she was smart enough to recognize quality when she saw it. Now Dutch was eating dirt for the fourth time in 10 minutes, spitting blood and what might have been a tooth, while Raven, the black stallion at the center of this whole mess, stood 20 feet away with his ears pinned back and his eyes rolling white, looking like he wanted to finish what he'd started. "That's enough," Evelyn called out, her voice cutting through the murmur of the crowd that had gathered. Nearly 40 people lined the fence, ranch hands, townfolk, drifters, and gamblers who'd heard the story and come to see if it was true. "Get him out of there before that horse stomps him into paste." Two of her hands, Jimmy Phelps and Carlos Reyes, climbed the fence and half-dragged, half-carried Dutch toward the gate. He was cursing the whole way, a stream of profanity creative enough to make the devil blush. But Evelyn noticed he wasn't fighting too hard to stay in that corral. Pride could take you far, but survival instinct usually won out in the end. Dutch's friends hauled him past the gate and dropped him in the dirt outside. He sat there breathing hard, one eye already swelling shut, his fancy leather vest torn at the shoulder where Raven's teeth had found purchase during the second buck. "You got a demon in there, woman!" Dutch spat, pointing an accusatory finger at Evelyn. Blood ran down his chin. "That ain't no horse. That's something else wearing a horse's skin." Evelyn didn't respond. She'd heard it all before. 23 men before Dutch, each one certain they'd be different, each one leaving with fewer pieces than they'd arrived with. Broken ribs, dislocated shoulders. One man, a bronc rider from Nevada who'd won competitions from Sacramento to St. Louis, had left with a shattered femur and the kind of limp that'd follow him to his grave. The money sat in a locked box in her study. $5,000. A fortune. More than most of these men would see in 5 years of hard work. All they had to do was stay mounted on Raven for 10 minutes. No saddle required, though she allowed it. No rules about how you rode, what gear you used, what tricks you tried. Just 10 minutes, 600 seconds. Nobody had made it past 90. "Next!" someone shouted from the crowd, and Evelyn turned to see a young kid, couldn't have been more than 19, climbing down from a painted mare tied to the fence. He had the lean, hungry look of someone who'd been surviving rather than living, all sharp angles and nervous energy. "How old are you?" Evelyn asked. "Old enough to ride," the kid shot back, chin jutting forward. "Name's Samuel Finch. I grew up breaking Mustangs in Colorado, wild ones, straight off the range. This horse might be mean, but he ain't wild, and I need that money." Evelyn studied him for a long moment. She'd learned to read desperation over the years. You couldn't run a ranch alone for 3 seasons without developing that skill, and this boy was drowning in it, probably had debts. Maybe a sick family member. Perhaps he'd just made the kind of mistakes young men made and was looking for a way to fix them with quick money. "The rules," she started. "I know the rules," Samuel interrupted. 10 minutes mounted. I can use whatever gear I want. If I get thrown and can't continue, it's over. If I hurt the horse, it's over. If I make the time, I get the money." He was already walking toward the gate. "Let's do this before I lose my nerve." Carlos and Jimmy exchanged glances. Carlos shook his head slightly. "Don't do it," the gesture said. But Jimmy just shrugged. They'd seen this same scene play out 24 times. One more wouldn't make much difference. Evelyn nodded. "Your funeral." Samuel climbed through the fence rails and dropped into the corral, landing in a crouch. Raven was on the far side, near the water trough, but the stallion's head came up immediately, ears swiveling forward like rifle sights acquiring a target. The horse was magnificent, even Evelyn had to admit that. 17 hands of pure black muscle, not a white hair anywhere on him, with a mane that fell like dark water and eyes that held something she couldn't quite name. Intelligence, maybe. Or rage. or both twisted together into something that made men nervous just looking at him. Her husband had brought Raven home 4 years ago, wild caught from somewhere up north, talking about bloodlines and breeding stock and the fortune they'd make from colts sired by an animal this impressive. Thomas had always been a dreamer, seeing potential where others saw problems, finding hope in the darkest situations. That optimism had gotten him killed 2 winters back, frozen to death checking fence lines during an unexpected blizzard. They'd found him 3 days later, stiff as cordwood, still holding the wire cutters he'd been using to repair a break in the north pasture. Evelyn had buried him on a hill overlooking the valley. Then she'd sold off half the cattle, let go of most of the hands, and focused on survival. The ranch was too much for one woman, everyone said. She should sell it, move to town, maybe find another husband to take care of things. She'd told them all to go to hell. Raven had been part of what she'd kept. Not out of sentiment, Thomas had never even gotten a halter on the animal, but because something in that horse's refusal to submit resonated with her. The world wanted to break both of them. Neither was willing to bend. Samuel approached the stallion with what Evelyn had to admit was decent technique. He moved sideways, not directly forward, keeping his body angled and his hands visible. He spoke in low tones, words she couldn't hear from this distance, but that seemed calm enough. Raven watched him come, nostrils flaring, testing the air. The stallion's skin twitched along his shoulders, muscles bunching beneath the glossy black coat. Samuel got within 15 feet. Then 10. Then Raven charged. It happened fast, faster than seemed possible for an animal that size. 1 second the horse was standing still. The next he was a black thunderbolt of fury and motion, hooves churning dirt, teeth bared in a scream that raised the hair on Evelyn's neck. Samuel tried to dodge. Credit to him, his reflexes were good. But good wasn't enough. Raven caught him with a shoulder that sent the kid flying backward like a rag doll. Samuel hit the ground hard enough to make dust explode upward in a cloud, rolled twice, and came up gasping. The stallion wheeled around, ears flat against his skull, and charged again. "Get out!" Evelyn shouted, but Samuel was already scrambling for the fence, survival instinct overriding whatever pride or desperation had brought him into that corral. He hit the rails and vaulted over them with Raven's teeth snapping at the air 6 inches behind him. The kid landed on the other side in a heap, chest heaving, face white as milk. He looked up at Evelyn with wide eyes. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. "That thing wants to kill people." "No," Evelyn said quietly. "He just doesn't want to be ridden." Samuel picked himself up, dusted off his pants with shaking hands, and walked away without another word. The crowd parted to let him through, some laughing, others looking thoughtful. A few had probably lost money on bets. The sun was getting lower now, painting the valley in shades of amber and copper. Evelyn glanced at the sky, judging the light. Maybe another hour before dark. Maybe 2 riders, if they moved quickly. "Who's next?" she called out. A man separated from the crowd, older than Samuel, younger than Dutch, with the weathered look of someone who'd spent his whole life outdoors. He wore a battered hat with a rattlesnake band and had a rope coiled over his shoulder. "Name's Jack Sutherland," he announced. "I'll give it a try." "Same rules," Evelyn said. "Understood." Jack climbed into the corral with the easy confidence of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. He shook out his rope, building a loop, and started swinging it overhead. The whistling sound made Raven's head snap up, ears forward now, tracking the rope's movement. "He's going to try and rope him first," Carlos muttered, standing next to Evelyn now. "Tire him out." "Won't work," Evelyn said. "You know that, I know that. But Jack there thinks he's smarter than everyone who came before." Carlos was right. Jack did think that. She could see it in the way he moved, the set of his shoulders, the calculating look in his eyes as he maneuvered for position. He waited until Raven moved toward the water trough again, then sent the loop flying. His aim was good. Excellent, actually. The rope settled around Raven's neck like it belonged there, and for half a heartbeat, Jack's face lit up with triumph. Then Raven exploded. The stallion reared up on his hind legs, front hooves pawing the air, and screamed, a sound of pure rage that echoed off the barn walls. He came down hard, spun in a complete circle, and before Jack could even think about setting his feet, the rope went taut and yanked the man off balance. What followed was ugly. Raven dragged Jack through the dirt like a child pulling a toy, slamming him into the fence rails, the water trough, anything solid enough to hurt. Jack had the sense to let go of the rope after the second impact, but by then the damage was done. He lay in the dirt clutching his ribs, the rope still around Raven's neck, the stallion standing over him with murder in his eyes. Jimmy and Carlos were through the fence before Evelyn could even shout. They grabbed Jack under the arms and hauled him out while Raven snapped at their heels, close enough that Jimmy's shirt tail got torn, a piece of fabric hanging from the horse's teeth like a trophy. They got Jack outside the corral and laid him down. He was conscious but glassy-eyed, breathing in short, painful gasps. Broken ribs for sure, maybe worse. "Get him to Doc Morrison," Evelyn ordered. "Tell the doc to send me the bill." She always paid the medical bills. It was part of the deal she'd made with herself when she started this whole thing. The men came of their own free will, knowing the risks, but she'd be damned if she'd let them suffer without help afterward. The crowd had gone quiet now, the earlier excitement bleeding away into something more somber. They'd come for entertainment, for spectacle, maybe hoping to see someone actually ride the devil horse. What they were getting was a glimpse of something darker, human ambition colliding with animal fury, and the animal winning every single time. "That's enough for today," Evelyn announced. "We're done." A few grumbles rose from the crowd, but nobody argued too hard. The sun was touching the horizon now anyway, painting the sky in shades of blood and fire. The light was wrong for this kind of work. People started drifting away, heading for the bunkhouse or the road, talking in low voices about what they'd seen. Evelyn stayed at the fence, watching Raven. The stallion stood in the center of the corral, sides heaving, the rope still dangling from his neck. He looked exhausted but unbroken, as magnificent and terrible as the first day Thomas had brought him home. "You think anyone can ride him?" Jimmy asked, coming to stand beside her. Carlos had gone with Jack to the doctor's, leaving just the two of them. "I don't know," Evelyn admitted. "Maybe. But not like this. Not with force. Not with tricks." "Then why keep doing it? You could sell him, get a decent price, even unbroken. Some people would pay for bloodlines alone." Evelyn was quiet for a long moment, watching the way the dying light played across Raven's coat, turning the black to dark amber. "Thomas used to say that some things in this world aren't meant to be broken," she finally said. "That there's strength in knowing when to let go, when to accept that not everything bends to our will." She glanced at Jimmy. He never quite figured out how to apply that to himself, but maybe he was right about the horse. "So what are you looking for?" "I don't know," Evelyn said again, "but I'll know it when I see it." Jimmy nodded slowly like he understood even though he probably didn't, and headed for the barn to start evening chores. Evelyn stayed at the fence until full dark, until Raven was just a shadow moving in the corral, until the stars came out hard and bright overhead. Then she walked back to the house, climbed the steps to her porch, and sat in the rocking chair Thomas had built their first year together. The wood was smooth under her hands, worn by use and weather, and she could almost feel him in the grain of it, the way certain objects hold echoes of the people who made them. Tomorrow more men would come. They always did. Word had spread throughout the territory now, the widow with the impossible challenge, the fortune waiting for anyone brave or foolish enough to claim it. They came from Wyoming, Colorado, New Mexico, even as far as California. Cowboys and soldiers, gamblers and drifters, men running towards something or away from it. She'd turn none of them away. The challenge stood. 10 minutes on Raven, and the money was theirs. But somewhere in the back of her mind, she wondered what would happen if someone actually did it. If someone managed to stay mounted for those 600 seconds, proved it could be done, claimed the prize, and rode away. Would that be victory? Or just another kind of breaking? She didn't have an answer, so she sat in the darkness, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, cattle lowing in distant pastures, horses shifting in the barn, an owl calling from the cottonwood tree by the creek, and tried not to think about all the empty rooms behind her, all the silence that used to be filled with Thomas's voice, his laughter, his endless dreams. The ranch had been his vision. Now it was her burden. And Raven, wild, untamable Raven, had somehow become the symbol of both. Miles away, on a road that cut through sagebrush and stone, a man named Cole Ryder heard the story for the first time. He was sitting in a saloon in a town too small to have a real name, just the Junction, because it sat where two cattle trails crossed. The whiskey was cheap and burned going down, which was exactly what he wanted. Burn away the memories. Burn away the past. Burn until there was nothing left but the present moment, manageable and small. The man telling the story was a drover named Pete, rail-thin and missing most of his teeth, who'd apparently been present for one of the failed attempts. He was 2 drinks past sober and enjoying his audience, a handful of ranch hands and Cole, who hadn't asked to listen but couldn't avoid it in a room this small. "I'm telling you, I seen men ride broncs that would kill a normal person just for looking at 'em wrong," Pete was saying, gesturing wildly with his whiskey glass. "Seen a Mustang in Nevada damn near scalp a man with his front hooves. Watched a paint horse in Colorado buck for 47 minutes straight, trying to throw a rider who tied himself to the saddle, which was cheating, sure, but showed dedication." He paused for dramatic effect, making sure everyone was paying attention. "But I ain't never seen nothing like this Raven horse. He's got the devil in him, I swear it. Black as midnight, big as a barn, and meaner than a snake with a toothache. The Widow Cross, she's offering $5,000 to anyone who can stay mounted for 10 minutes. Just 10, and nobody's even come close." "How many have tried?" someone asked. 24 when I was there, a week and a half ago. Heard it's up past 30 now, maybe more, and every single one got thrown, stomped, bit, or all 3. Saw a man from Wyoming, big fellow, used to break cavalry horses for the army, get launched so hard he cleared the corral fence and landed in a water trough. Another guy tried sneaking up while the horse was sleeping. Raven woke up and chased him up a fence post. Man hung there for 20 minutes before someone got the horse distracted enough for him to climb down. The listeners laughed, but it was nervous laughter, the kind that comes when you're not entirely sure something's funny or just terrifying. "Why's she doing it?" another voice asked. "The widow. What's the point?" Pete shrugged. "Who knows? Some say she's crazy with grief. Her husband died a couple years back, froze to death out on the range. Others say she's just stubborn, trying to prove something about the horse. Maybe both." He drained his glass and signaled for another. "All I know is that money's real, and it's sitting there waiting. And that horse ain't getting any easier to ride." Cole listened to all of this without comment, nursing his whiskey and watching the amber liquid catch the lamplight. He had no interest in challenges, no need for glory, and $5,000 wouldn't fix what was broken inside him anyway. He'd left the war 3 years ago, though left wasn't quite the right word. You didn't leave a war. It let you go, if you were lucky, but kept pieces of you. Pieces you'd never get back. He'd been a corporal with the 4th Cavalry, fought in campaigns he tried not to remember, did things that woke him up at night covered in sweat and shaking. When the war finally ended, he'd taken his mustering out pay and started walking, not toward anything, just away. Away from the screaming, away from the blood, away from the faces of men he'd killed and men who'd died beside him. 3 years of drifting had followed. He worked when he needed money, ranch hand, freight hauler, whatever came available. Moved on when the staying started to feel permanent. Made no friends, kept no promises, left no trace. It was a kind of survival. Not living, exactly, but the next best thing. "You thinking about trying?" Pete asked, suddenly focused on Cole. "You look like you can ride." "No," Cole said simply. "Why not? $5,000 is more money than most folks see in a lifetime. Could set yourself up, buy land, start over." Cole set his empty glass on the bar. "Not interested." He stood up, dropped a coin next to the glass, and headed for the door. Behind him, Pete launched into another story, something about a man who'd tried to drug the horse with whiskey-soaked oats and ended up getting kicked into next week. But Cole wasn't listening anymore. Outside, the night air was cold and clean, scrubbed by wind that came down from mountains he couldn't see but knew were there. His horse, a rangy buckskin mare named Dust, was tied to the hitching rail, patient as stone. He checked her hooves out of habit, ran a hand down her legs, checking for heat or swelling, then swung into the saddle. The road stretched out in both directions, pale in the moonlight. North would take him toward Wyoming, south toward New Mexico, east back toward settled country and all the complications that came with it, west deeper into territory that was still more empty than full. He sat there for a long moment, reins loose in his hands, while Dust shifted her weight and waited for a decision. Then, without quite knowing why, he turned her west, toward Dry Creek Valley, toward a widow and an untamable horse, toward something he couldn't name but felt pulling at him like a current beneath still water, drawing him forward into whatever came next. He told himself it was just direction, just movement, just one road as good as another. But somewhere deep down, in the place where truth lived beneath all the lies we tell ourselves, he knew better. Something was calling, and for the first time in 3 years, Cole Ryder was answering. The journey to Dry Creek Valley took Cole 4 days, though it could have been 3 if he'd pushed harder. He didn't push. There was no urgency in him anymore. Hadn't been since the war ended and left him hollow as a rotted tree still standing upright. Dust carried him through country that shifted from scrubland to rocky passes to high desert dotted with Joshua trees that looked like men frozen mid-prayer. They camped where water could be found, a creek bed that still had flow, a cattle tank some rancher had built and abandoned, once at a spring that bubbled up between rocks and tasted of minerals and earth. At night, Cole lay in his bedroll staring at stars so thick they looked like spilled salt, and tried not to think about why he was riding towards something instead of just away. The not thinking rarely worked. His mind circled the question like a dog worrying a bone. $5,000 meant nothing to him. He'd survived on less than $50 for months at a time, living off what he could hunt or the occasional day's wages from ranchers who needed an extra hand. Money was useful, but it wasn't why his chest tightened when Pete had told that story, wasn't why he'd turned dust west without deciding to. Maybe it was the horse. Something about an animal that refused to be broken resonated in a way Cole couldn't articulate. He'd seen too many things bent to the point of breaking during the war. Men, animals, even the land itself. And part of him wanted to believe that some things could resist that, could remain whole. Or maybe he was just tired of drifting, and this seemed like a destination, any destination, which was more than he'd had in 3 years. He reached Dry Creek Valley on a Thursday afternoon when the sun was a fist of white heat overhead and the valley shimmered with heat waves that made the distant buildings waver like mirages. The town itself, if you could call it that, was barely more than a wide spot in the road. General store, saloon, livery stable, a building that might have been a sheriff's office once but looked abandoned now. Maybe 30 buildings total, half of them empty. The Cross Ranch sat 3 miles outside town, up a dirt road that climbed gradually into foothills where cottonwood trees clustered near a creek and the grass ran green despite the season. Cole spotted the buildings from a mile away, main house, barn, bunkhouse, several corrals, all of it arranged with the practical efficiency of people who worked for living rather than show. He saw the crowd before he saw the horse. Maybe 20 people lined the fence of the largest corral, watching something Cole couldn't see from this angle. Their attention was fixed, bodies leaning forward, and even from a distance he could feel the tension in the air, that particular quality of anticipation that came before violence or revelation, or both. Cole dismounted and led Dust toward the scene, moving slow, not announcing himself. Old habits from the war: observe first, engage second, and never walk into a situation you didn't understand. As he got closer, he heard it, a sound that made the hair on his neck stand up despite the heat. A horse screaming. Not the whinny of greeting or the neigh of alarm, but a full-throated scream of rage and fury that didn't sound like it should come from an animal at all. Then he saw Raven. The stallion was in the center of the corral, circling a man who'd been thrown and was trying to crawl toward the fence. The horse's coat was black enough to drink light, muscles sliding beneath skin with each movement, and his eyes, Cole could see them even from here, burned with something that went beyond animal instinct into territory that felt almost personal. The man on the ground was bleeding from somewhere, leaving a dark trail in the dirt. He made it maybe 10 feet before Raven charged again, hooves churning dust, and the crowd gasped collectively. 2 ranch hands vaulted the fence and grabbed the man, hauling him backward while Raven wheeled and screamed that terrible sound again. They got the man out. Barely. Cole watched the whole thing with the detachment of someone who'd seen worse, much worse. But even he had to admit it was impressive in a horrifying kind of way. The horse wasn't just trying to throw the rider. It wanted to hurt him. Wanted to make a point. "That's 39, someone in the crowd muttered. 39 men, and not one lasted more than 2 minutes. Cole tied Dust to a fence post away from the commotion and moved closer, working his way through the crowd until he had a clear view. The injured man was being helped toward the house by 2 others, limping badly. His shirt was torn and blood ran down his arm from what looked like bite marks. Raven stood in the center of the corral, sides heaving, ears pinned flat against his skull. Magnificent and terrible, exactly like Pete had described, but seeing him in person was different. There was intelligence in the way the horse moved, the way he tracked people around the fence line, The way he positioned himself to keep the maximum distance from the humans while maintaining awareness of all of them. Not just wild. Smart. You thinking about trying? Cole turned to find a man about his own age, maybe a year or two younger, standing next to him. Mexican, built compact and solid, with the kind of hands that came from years of rope work and fence mending. He wore a beat-up hat with a turquoise band and had a smile that suggested he found most of life mildly amusing. "No," Cole said. "Smart. I'm Carlos Reyes. I work here." He nodded toward the corral. "Been working here long enough to watch that devil put 20 men in the ground. Well, not in the ground, but you know what I mean. Cole Ryder. You come for the challenge anyway, even though you're not trying?" "Heard about it. Got curious." Carlos laughed. "Curiosity. That's what got the cat killed," my mother used to say. "Also, what brings every fool in 3 territories to this ranch." He gestured at the crowd. "Half these people are hoping to see someone ride him. Other half are hoping to see someone die. Nobody's gotten either yet, but they keep coming back." "The woman who owns the place," Cole said. "She here?" "Miss Cross? Yeah, she's—" Carlos scanned the crowd, then pointed. "There, by the gate." Cole followed the gesture and saw her for the first time. Evelyn Cross. She was maybe 35, though hardship could age a person, so it was hard to tell for certain. Medium height, lean in the way of people who worked physically every day, wearing men's trousers and a shirt with the sleeves rolled up. Her hair was pulled back in a braid that had probably started neat that morning, but was coming loose now, dark strands escaping around her face. She stood with one boot on the bottom rail of the fence, watching Raven with an expression Cole couldn't quite read. Not satisfaction at another failed attempt. Not disappointment either. Something else. Something that looked almost like waiting. "She seems calm," Cole observed, "for someone who just watched a man nearly get killed. She pays their medical bills," Carlos said. "Every one of them. Doc Morrison in town makes more off this challenge than everything else combined. But yeah, she's calm. Has to be. Running this place alone would break most men, but she just keeps going. Stubborn as that horse, in her way." The crowd was starting to disperse now, the show over for the day. Some headed toward the bunkhouse, others to horses tied along the fence line. A few lingered, talking in low voices, probably discussing whether they'd try tomorrow or if witnessing this was enough to cure them of ambition. Cole watched Evelyn Cross walk into the corral. Just walked right in, calm as anything, while Raven stood 30 feet away watching her with those burning eyes. The horse didn't charge, didn't scream, just watched as she picked up a rope that had been dropped in the dirt, coiled it methodically, and hung it on a fence post. "She goes in there alone?" Cole asked. "Sometimes. To feed him. Water. Clean the trough. Raven doesn't bother her much. I think he knows she's not trying to ride him, or maybe he just respects that she doesn't flinch." Carlos pulled a cigarette from his pocket and lit it, cupping the match against the breeze. "You sticking around?" "Maybe a day or two. Bunkhouse is full, but you can camp by the creek if you want. Miss Cross doesn't mind. Hell, she's used to people showing up. Just don't steal anything or bother the livestock." "Fair enough." Carlos nodded and headed toward the barn, leaving Cole alone at the fence. Most of the crowd had cleared out now, just a few stragglers remaining. Raven had moved to the far side of the corral and was drinking from the water trough, the rage seeming to drain out of him now that the human had been removed. Evelyn Cross emerged from the corral, latching the gate behind her with practiced efficiency. She noticed Cole watching and paused, assessing him with the same careful attention she'd given the horse. Up close, he could see the lines around her eyes, the weathering of sun and wind on her skin, the calluses on her hands when she wiped dust off her pants. "You here for the challenge?" she asked. Her voice was lower than he'd expected, with a roughness that suggested she didn't waste words on small talk. "No?" She waited, clearly expecting more explanation. When none came, she raised an eyebrow. "Then what are you here for?" "Heard the story," Cole said. "Wanted to see if it was true." "And?" "It's true." Something that might have been amusement flickered across her face, there and gone so fast he almost missed it. "Most men who say they're not here for the challenge end up trying anyway. Pride gets the better of them, or greed, or both. I'm not most men." "Everyone says that too." She started walking toward the house, then paused and glanced back. You can camp by the creek if you need a place. There's good water and some shade. Just stay clear of the cattle and we won't have problems. Appreciated. She nodded once and continued toward the house, boots kicking up small puffs of dust with each step. Cole watched her go, then collected dust and led the mare toward the creek Carlos had mentioned. It ran about a quarter-mile from the main buildings, cutting through a stand of cottonwoods that provided the promised shade. The water was clear and cold, probably fed from springs higher in the hills, and the grass grew thick along the banks. Cole unsaddled Dust, rubbed her down, and let her drink before hobbling her where she could graze. Then he set about making camp, bedroll, small fire ring, his few possessions arranged within reach. The routine was so familiar he barely thought about it anymore, muscle memory from 3 years of doing the same thing in 100 different places. By the time he finished, the sun was sliding toward the horizon, painting the valley in shades of copper and gold. Cole sat with his back against a cottonwood and rolled a cigarette, watching the play of light on water and listening to the evening sounds of the ranch. Cattle lowing somewhere distant, horses moving in the barn, men's voices carrying from the bunkhouse, talking and laughing about the day's events. Normal sounds. Peaceful sounds. The kind he'd almost forgotten existed during the war when everything was screaming and gunfire and the wet sounds of men dying. He smoked his cigarette down to nothing and tried not to think about why being here felt different than all the other places he'd drifted through. Tried not to examine the feeling in his chest that might have been interest or might have been something closer to hope, which was dangerous because hope could hurt you worse than anything. The evening settled into night, stars appearing one by one until the sky was full of them, and Cole lay in his bedroll listening to the creek and thinking about a black horse that refused to be broken and a widow who seemed to be waiting for something she couldn't name. He fell asleep to those thoughts and woke before dawn to the sound of someone moving near his camp. His hand was on his knife before his eyes opened fully, another habit from the war that had never left, but he relaxed when he saw it was just Carlos carrying 2 tin cups of coffee. Didn't mean to startle you, Carlos said, though his eyes had definitely noted the knife. Thought you might want some coffee before the circus starts. Cole sat up, sheathing the blade, and accepted one of the cups. The coffee was strong enough to strip paint and tasted like it had been made with creek water, but it was hot, and that was enough. Circus? It's Friday. Word's gotten around. We usually get 6 or 7 attempts on Fridays, more on Saturdays. Carlos settled himself on a fallen log, cradling his own cup. You sleep okay? Creek's not too loud? Slept fine. They drank in companionable silence for a while, watching the sky lighten from black to deep blue to the pale gray that preceded sunrise. Birds started calling from the cottonwoods. Somewhere a rooster announced his opinions about the new day. You were in the war, Carlos said suddenly. It wasn't a question. Cole looked at him. What makes you think that? The way you move. The way you woke up when I got close. Also, you got that look. Jimmy, he's the other hand who works here. He was at Shiloh. Has the same look sometimes, like you're seeing something the rest of us can't. Cole didn't confirm or deny it, just drank his coffee and watched a hawk circle overhead, riding thermals that were just starting to form as the air warmed. I don't talk about it, he finally said. Fair enough. Most men who were there don't. Carlos stood, draining the last of his coffee. Anyway, thought you should know. There's talk in the bunkhouse about you. Some of the boys think you're sizing up the challenge, building a strategy. They're taking bets on whether you'll try today or tomorrow. Tell them to save their money. I did. They didn't believe me. Carlos grinned. But that's their problem, not yours. Come up to the house around noon if you want lunch. Miss Cross always makes extra, and there's no point wasting food. He headed back toward the ranch buildings, leaving Cole alone with the dregs of his coffee and the rising sun. Cole finished the cup, rinsed it in the creek, then spent the next hour tending to Dust and checking his gear with the kind of methodical attention that kept your mind from wandering into territory you'd rather avoid. By the time he made his way back toward the main buildings, the first challengers were already arriving. 3 of them rode in together, cowboys from their dress and bearing, probably working the same outfit, and talked each other into this on a whiskey-fueled bet. They tied their horses and swaggered toward the corral with the kind of confidence that came before experience knocked it out of you. Cole found a spot along the fence where he could watch without being in the way. The crowd was smaller than yesterday, maybe a dozen people, Most of them ranch hands or locals who'd seen this enough times that the novelty had worn off, but the spectacle still drew them. Evelyn Cross emerged from the house and walked toward the corral, moving with that same purposeful efficiency he'd noticed yesterday. She acknowledged the cowboys with a nod, explained the rules in a voice that carried without shouting, and opened the gate. The first cowboy lasted maybe 45 seconds. He came in with a rope and a saddle, thinking he'd get tack on Raven first and ride second, but the horse had other ideas. Raven let him get close enough to build confidence, then exploded sideways and caught the man with a kick that sent him spinning. The cowboy hit the dirt hard, saddle flying one direction and rope the other, and had the sense to stay down while Raven circled him like a shark. They dragged him out. The second cowboy tried a different approach. No gear at all, just his own skill and a prayer. He actually got his hands on Raven's mane, got one leg up, almost made it to a mounted position before the stallion bucked so hard the man went airborne. He landed outside the corral, clear over the fence, and lay there groaning while his friends laughed in the way men do when someone else's pain proves their own wisdom. The third cowboy took one look at what happened to his companions and declined to try. Smart. This pattern repeated throughout the morning. Men came, tried various strategies, ropes, saddles, bareback mounts, even one fool who tried to vault onto Raven's back from a standing position, and left bloodied or bruised or both. Evelyn watched each attempt with that same waiting expression, and after each failure she went into the corral alone to collect dropped gear and check on the horse. Cole watched her during one of these moments. The way she moved around Raven with awareness but not fear. The horse tracked her movements but didn't charge, didn't scream, just watched with those intelligent eyes as she picked up a rope someone had left, coiled it, hung it on the fence. There was something there. Some understanding or arrangement between woman and animal that none of these challengers had figured out. They all came in trying to dominate, to prove something, to win. She just came in to be present, to share space, and the horse allowed it. "You seen what I'm seeing?" a voice asked beside him. Cole turned to find a man about 50, grizzled and bow-legged, with the permanent squint of someone who'd spent decades in bright sunlight. He wore a sheriff's star pinned to a vest that had seen better days. "Depends what you're seeing," Cole said. "That horse don't want to be ridden, but he don't mind the woman. Which tells me it ain't about humans in general. It's about what the humans want from him." The sheriff spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "I'm Tom Hendricks, sheriff of this territory such as it is. You Cole Ryder?" Word travels fast. Small valley, not much happens. When someone new shows up and camps by the creek instead of trying for glory, people notice. Hendricks studied him with the kind of attention lawmen developed over years of assessing threats. "You running from anything I should know about?" "No." "Running toward anything?" "No." "Just passing through?" "Something like that." Hendricks nodded slowly. "Well, you seem peaceful enough, and Miss Cross hasn't complained, so you're welcome to stay as long as that remains true." He paused. "But if you are thinking about trying for that horse, do yourself a favor and don't. I've seen what happens when men get fixated on something they can't have. Never ends well." "Not planning to try?" "Good. Because that horse has put more men in Doc Morrison's office than bar fights and cattle stampedes combined, and I'd rather not add you to the list." The sheriff wandered off, and Cole went back to watching. Another challenger stepped into the corral, older than most, with gray in his beard and scars that suggested he'd been doing this kind of work for decades. He approached Raven with what looked like genuine respect, moving slow, speaking soft, trying to project calm. Raven let him get within 10 feet, then charged. The man dodged with surprising agility for his age, but not quite far enough. Raven's shoulder clipped him and sent him spinning. He rolled with it, came up running, and made it to the fence just ahead of snapping teeth. The crowd actually applauded that one. Style points for the escape, if nothing else. By noon, 7 men had tried and 7 had failed. The shortest attempt lasted maybe 20 seconds. The longest stretched to 90 before the rider got launched so hard he cleared the fence rail and landed in a water trough positioned outside the corral. Cole found himself cataloging each attempt, analyzing what worked and what didn't, though he couldn't say why. Force didn't work. The horse was stronger than any man. Speed didn't work. Raven was faster. Tricks didn't work because the stallion saw through them. Even genuine skill and respect only got you so far before some invisible line got crossed and violence followed. What that line was, Cole couldn't determine. It seemed almost arbitrary. One man could approach within 5 feet before Raven reacted. Another couldn't get within 20. One could speak to the horse and get ignored. Another got charged the moment words left his mouth. Unless it wasn't arbitrary at all. Unless Raven was reading something in each man, some quality or intention that existed beneath words and actions, and responding to that. "You hungry?" Cole turned to find Evelyn Cross standing a few feet away. She'd approached while he was focused on his thoughts, quiet as a cat. Up close in daylight, he could see details he'd missed before. Flecks of gold in her brown eyes, a scar along her jawline that looked old, the capable set of her shoulders that came from carrying weight that would have crushed someone weaker. "Carlos said there's lunch," Cole answered. "There is. You coming?" He followed her to the house, leaving the corral and its ongoing spectacle behind. The main building was solidly built but showed signs of deferred maintenance, paint peeling in places, a loose board on the porch steps, shutters that needed rehinging, the kind of things that accumulated when there weren't enough hours in the day or hands to do the work. Inside was cleaner than he expected, sparse but organized. A main room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen area with a wood stove, a table that could seat 8 but was currently set for 4. Everything practical, nothing decorative except a single photograph on the mantel showing a younger Evelyn standing next to a man who must have been her husband. They both looked happy in that captured moment, unaware of what was coming. Carlos and another man, Jimmy, presumably, were already at the table. Jimmy had the haunted eyes Carlos had mentioned, the look of someone who'd seen things that didn't leave you even when you left them. He nodded to Cole but didn't speak, just went back to eating the stew Evelyn had made. The meal was simple. Beef stew, bread, water, but well-prepared and filling. They ate mostly in silence, the comfortable kind that came from people who worked together enough that constant conversation wasn't necessary. Occasionally, Carlos would mention something about the afternoon's work schedule, and Evelyn would respond, but mostly they just ate. "You ever think about ending the challenge?" Cole asked after a while, surprising himself. He hadn't meant to speak at all. Evelyn looked at him across the table, spoon paused halfway to her mouth. "Why would I? Men keep getting hurt. Men keep choosing to try. I explain the risks. They sign a paper saying they understand. What they do after that is their decision. But you know none of them can do it." "I don't know that," she said, setting her spoon down. "I suspect it, but suspecting isn't knowing. Maybe tomorrow someone walks in who's different, who sees what needs to be seen. Until then, the challenge stands. And if that day never comes..." She was quiet for a long moment, eyes distant, like she was looking at something beyond the walls of this room. "Then I'll know something else instead. That some things aren't meant to be ridden. That some things should stay wild." She looked back at him. "Would that bother you?" "No," Cole said truthfully. "I think I'd respect it." Something shifted in her expression, subtle but present. A slight relaxation around her eyes, a microscopic easing of the tension she carried in her shoulders, like she'd been braced for argument and surprised to not receive it. After lunch, Cole helped clear the table despite Evelyn's protest that guests didn't need to work. The afternoon brought more challengers, but he found himself less interested in watching them fail and more interested in watching how Raven reacted to different approaches, how Evelyn moved through the chaos with steady calm, how the ranch operated around this strange spectacle that had become its center. As the sun dropped toward evening and the last challenger limped away, Cole made a decision that would change everything, though he didn't know it yet. He walked to the corral where Raven stood watching the humans depart, still magnificent, still unbroken, still waiting for something these men couldn't provide. And Cole began to understand what that something might be. Cole didn't approach the corral right away. Instead, he stood at the fence line as the last of the day's spectators dispersed, watching Raven move through the space with an awareness that seemed to extend beyond normal animal perception. The stallion paced the perimeter, occasionally stopping to test the air, his dark coat rippling with muscle and nervous energy. "You planning something?" Carlos had appeared beside him, quiet as smoke. The man had a talent for that. "Just watching," Cole said. "Uh-huh." Carlos pulled out his tobacco pouch and started rolling a cigarette. "You got the same look Jimmy gets sometimes. before he does something either real smart or real stupid. Usually can't tell which until after. I'm not trying the challenge. Didn't say you were. Carlos lit his cigarette, the match flare bright in the gathering dusk. But you're thinking about something. And whatever it is, it involves that horse. Cole didn't answer, which was answer enough. They stood in silence while the sky deepened from blue to purple and the first stars appeared like pinpricks in cloth. Raven had stopped pacing and was drinking from the trough, his reflection dark and shifting in the water. The thing nobody understands, Carlos said after a while, is that Miss Cross isn't looking for someone to break that horse. She's looking for someone who won't try to. Then why offer the challenge at all? Because how else do you find that person? You can't advertise for it, can't explain it in words. So you put out the bait, money, glory, whatever, and wait to see who shows up for the wrong reasons and who shows up for something else. Carlos took a long drag on his cigarette. She's been waiting 2 years, starting to think maybe that person doesn't exist. Maybe they don't. Maybe. Carlos dropped his cigarette and ground it out with his heel. Or maybe they're standing right here having this conversation and just don't know it yet. He walked away before Cole could respond, heading toward the bunkhouse where lamplight spilled from the windows and the sound of men talking drifted on the evening air. Cole stayed at the fence, hands wrapped around the top rail, thinking about a war that had taught him everything about breaking things and nothing about how to fix them. The next morning arrived cold and gray, clouds rolling in from the north with the promise of rain that this country desperately needed. Cole woke to the smell of it in the air, that particular electric quality that preceded storms, and lay in his bedroll listening to the wind pick up in the cottonwoods. He thought about leaving, saddling dust and riding out before the rain came, before he got any more tangled in whatever was happening here. The thought sat in his chest with familiar weight, the urge to move on, to not stay anywhere long enough for it to matter. But he didn't move, just lay there watching the sky lighten to the color of old pewter and trying to understand what was keeping him in place. By the time he made it to the main buildings, the first drops were starting to fall, fat and heavy, sending up small puffs of dust where they hit the dry ground. The usual crowd of spectators was notably absent. Nobody wanted to watch men get trampled in the mud. But a single figure stood by the corral fence. Evelyn Cross, wearing a canvas duster against the rain, studying Raven with that expression Cole was starting to recognize. Not quite sadness, not quite hope. Something suspended between the two. "Morning," she said without turning, somehow knowing he was there. "Morning." No challengers today. Rain keeps the glory seekers away. They'll be back tomorrow if it clears. She glanced at him. "You staying through the storm?" Hadn't decided. "The creek'll rise. Could be dangerous if you're camped too close to the bank. I'll move my gear if it gets bad." She nodded and went back to watching the horse. Raven was standing in the center of the corral with his head up, nostrils flared, reading the weather with senses humans had lost generations ago. The rain was coming down steadier now, darkening his coat until he looked like he'd been carved from shadow. "Can I ask you something?" Cole said. "You can ask. What happens if someone actually does it, rides him for 10 minutes, wins the money? Then what?" Evelyn was quiet for so long he thought she might not answer. The rain drummed on the fence rails and turned the dirt to mud, and somewhere in the distance thunder rumbled like a promise of violence. "I don't know," she finally said. "I suppose I'd have to figure out if I was trying to prove the horse could be ridden, or prove that he couldn't, and which answer I actually wanted." She looked at him directly then, rain running down her face, making her look younger and older at the same time. "Why do you ask?" "Because I think you already know the answer. You're just not ready to admit it." "And what answer is that? That you don't want him ridden at all. You want someone to understand why he shouldn't be." Something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. She turned back to the corral, hands tightening on the fence rail hard enough that her knuckles went white. "My husband brought that horse home 4 years ago," she said, voice low enough that Cole had to lean in to hear it over the rain. "Found him running wild up north, spent 3 months tracking him, finally cornered him in a box canyon and got a rope on him. Thomas was so proud. Said this horse would make our fortune. Best breeding stock in 3 territories. We'd sell colts for enough money to expand the ranch, hire more hands, build a real life here." She paused, watching Raven move through the rain. "He spent a year trying to break him, used every method he knew, kind ones and cruel ones and everything in between. That horse threw him so many times I lost count, kicked him, bit him, once chased him up onto the barn roof and kept him there for 3 hours until the horse got bored and wandered off. A sound that might have been a laugh caught in her throat. But Thomas never gave up, never admitted defeat, said some things were worth fighting for, worth bleeding for, worth whatever it took.
Then he died, Cole said quietly. Then he died. Out in a blizzard fixing fence that could have waited until spring, because he couldn't stand leaving work undone. Froze to death doing something that didn't need doing right then, driven by the same stubborn pride that kept him trying to break a horse that didn't want to be broken. She looked at Cole again. So you tell me, do I want someone to ride Raven, or do I want someone to prove that Thomas was wrong to try? That some things are supposed to stay wild, and there's strength in recognizing that instead of fighting it?
Cole didn't have an answer. Wasn't sure there was one that would help. So he just stood there in the rain with her, two people who'd both lost things they couldn't get back, watching a horse that represented something neither of them could fully articulate. You should get inside, Cheese, Evelyn finally said. This storm's going to get worse before it gets better. But Cole stayed at the fence even after she left, getting soaked through, watching Raven stand in the downpour like a statue carved from midnight. The horse seemed unbothered by the weather, almost peaceful in a way Cole hadn't seen during the challenges. Like this, alone, undemanded, simply existing, was what he was meant for. The rain continued all day and into the night, the steady kind of storm that the land needed but that made everything miserable for the creatures living on it. Cole moved his camp away from the creek as the water rose, relocating to a stand of rocks that provided some shelter. He built a small fire in a natural alcove, dried out his gear as best he could, and sat watching the lightning paint the sky in shades of white and purple. Dust stood with her back to the wind, patient as always, occasionally shaking water from her coat. She'd been through worse. They both had. The storm broke around midnight, clouds tearing apart to reveal stars that seemed impossibly bright after the darkness. Cole lay in his damp bedroll, listening to water drip from rocks and leaves, to the creek rushing higher than it had been, to the night sounds of a world washed clean. He thought about Evelyn's words, about her husband and his pride and his refusal to admit some battles couldn't be won, about how that pride had driven him to death in a blizzard, alone, fixing something that could have waited. Cole understood that kind of pride, had carried it himself once, back when he was young and thought being a soldier meant something noble. The war had beaten it out of him, replaced it with the kind of knowledge that came from watching better men die for causes that didn't matter, from killing people whose names he'd never know for reasons that made sense to someone far away who'd never seen the blood. He'd left the war carrying nothing but the understanding that pride was expensive and usually bought you nothing except a grave. But was that wisdom or just another kind of defeat? Morning came bright and clean, the air scrubbed by rain and smelling of sage and wet earth. Cole woke to sunlight slanting through the rocks and dust grazing on grass that looked greener than it had yesterday. The world felt new, or at least renewed, and for the first time in 3 years he felt something in his chest that might have been possibility. He found Carlos at the barn, mucking out stalls that had gotten muddy during the storm. "Storm's over," Carlos said by way of greeting, "which means the fools will be back. Probably have twice as many today, since they couldn't come yesterday." "Need help with that?" Cole gestured at the stall. Carlos looked surprised, but handed him a shovel without comment. They worked in silence for a while, the rhythm of it almost meditative. Scoop, lift, throw, repeat. Physical work that occupied your body and left your mind free to wander. "You ever try to do something that everyone told you was impossible?" Cole asked after a while. "Sure. Tried to teach Jimmy to play guitar once. Turns out some people are just tone deaf and there's nothing you can do about it." Carlos grinned. "Why?" "Just thinking. About the horse." "Maybe." Carlos leaned on his shovel. "You're different from the others who've come here. You know that, right? They all want to prove something, to themselves, to the crowd, to the horse. You're trying to understand something. Big difference. Understanding doesn't get you very far. Gets you further than pride. Pride just gets you thrown into a fence rail and bleeding from places you didn't know could bleed." They finished the stall and moved to the next one. Through the barn door, Cole could see the corral where Raven stood in morning sunlight that turned his coat from pure black to something that held hints of blue, like oil on water. The horse looked different today, calmer maybe, or just less agitated without the constant parade of challengers. What would you do? Cole asked. If you were going in there, how would you approach him?
Carlos was quiet for a long moment, considering. I wouldn't approach him at all. Not at first. I'd just be there. Let him get used to me. Let him decide I wasn't a threat. Could take hours. Could take days. But trying to rush it, that's what everyone else does. They got 10 minutes to win, so they think they got to make something happen in 10 minutes. But the horse doesn't care about their timeline. Makes sense. Of course, that won't win you the challenge. Can't just stand there for 10 minutes and claim victory. Gotta actually ride him. Carlos shrugged. Which is maybe the point. The challenge isn't really about riding. It's about finding someone who understands that the riding's not what matters. Before Cole could respond, the sound of horses approaching interrupted them. The first challengers of the day, arriving early to beat the crowd. 3 of them, sitting tall in their saddles, wearing the kind of confidence that would be gone by noon. The circus was starting again. Cole spent the morning watching from his usual spot at the fence, but today he paid attention to different things. Not just whether the men succeeded or failed, but what they did in those first few seconds when they entered the corral. How they held their bodies, what energy they projected, the subtle signals they sent that Raven read and responded to. Every single one entered with intention, with purpose, with a goal that existed before they even opened the gate. Get tack on the horse, get mounted, stay on for 10 minutes, claim the money. And every single one left bleeding or bruised or both. By afternoon, the count was up to 47 failed attempts. Some lasted longer than others, but the longest was barely 2 minutes before Raven threw the rider so hard the man's hat landed in the next county. The crowd had grown larger despite yesterday's storm. Word had spread that someone had come close, which was a lie, but lies traveled faster than truth in places like this. Cole noticed Evelyn watching him almost as much as she watched the challenges. She stood near the house, arms crossed, and whenever he glanced her direction, she was already looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read, like she was waiting for something, or dreading it, or both. Late afternoon, when the sun was starting its slow slide toward the horizon and the crowd had thinned to just the diehards, Cole made his decision. He walked to where Evelyn stood. I want to try, he said simply. She didn't look surprised, just studied him with those brown eyes that had seen too much disappointment to get excited about possibilities anymore. Why? Because I think I understand what you're looking for. And what's that? Someone who's not trying to win. She was quiet for a long moment, wind catching strands of hair that had escaped her braid and pulling them across her face. Behind her, the ranch house stood solid against the sky, built by someone who dreamed of legacy and left only absence. The rules are the same, she finally said. 10 minutes mounted. You can use whatever gear you want or none at all. If you get thrown and can't continue, it's over. If you hurt the horse, I won't hurt the horse. Everyone says that. Then they get scared or angry or desperate and they forget. She looked at him hard. I'm serious about this. You hurt that animal and you'll answer to me personally, and I promise you won't enjoy it. Understood? She nodded slowly. When? Now, if that's all right, before I think about it too much and change my mind. Something that might have been respect flickered across her face. She turned and called out to the remaining spectators. We've got another challenger, last one for today. The crowd perked up, those who'd been drifting away returning to the fence. Cole could hear the murmur of conversation, the exchange of bets, the speculation about how long this one would last. Someone mentioned he'd been camping by the creek for days without trying, which made him either smart or a coward, depending on who you asked. Carlos appeared at his elbow. You sure about this? No. Good. The ones who are sure are the ones who get hurt worst. He clasped Cole's shoulder briefly. Don't do anything stupid. Define stupid. Everything everyone else has tried. Cole almost smiled at that. Then he walked to the corral gate, Evelyn beside him, aware of the crowd watching and trying not to let it affect him. This wasn't about them. Wasn't about winning or losing or proving anything. It was about something he couldn't name but felt in his bones, pulling him forward like gravity. Evelyn opened the gate. You've got no gear? No gear. Then how? I'm not planning to ride him today. She paused, hand still on the gate latch. The challenge is 10 minutes mounted. I know, but that's not what this is about. Not yet. Understanding dawned in her eyes, followed by something that looked almost like relief. She stepped back. Then do what you need to do.
Cole entered the corral, and Evelyn closed the gate behind him with a sound of wood on metal that seemed too loud in the sudden quiet. The crowd had gone silent, watching, waiting for the violence that always came. Raven stood 40 feet away, near the water trough, head up and ears forward. Alert, but not yet aggressive. Cole could feel the horse's attention on him like physical weight, assessing, measuring, deciding how much of a threat this human represented. Cole didn't approach, didn't move toward the horse at all. Instead, he walked to the fence on the opposite side of the corral and sat down in the dirt, back against the rails, as casual as if he were resting under a tree on a summer afternoon. A murmur ran through the crowd. Confusion. Disappointment. What was this fool doing? Raven's ears swiveled, tracking Cole's movement, but the horse didn't charge. Just watched this strange human who'd entered the corral and then immediately stopped being a threat by removing himself from the equation. Minutes passed. 5, 10, 15. Is he even going to try? Someone in the crowd called out. This is boring, another voice complained. Give him time, Evelyn said, quiet but firm. He's got as long as he needs. Cole sat perfectly still, breathing slowly, letting his body relax into the earth beneath him. This was something he'd learned during the war, in those rare quiet moments between battles when staying alert would drive you mad and sleep wouldn't come. You found a middle space, present but not demanding, aware but not tense. You just existed, taking up your small piece of the world and asking nothing from it. Raven took a step toward him. Then another. Not charging, just moving with the kind of curiosity animals have when something doesn't behave the way they expect. Cole didn't react, didn't look directly at the horse, just kept his gaze soft and unfocused, watching without watching, aware without staring. The stallion came closer, 20 feet now, then 15. The crowd had gone completely silent. Even the wind seemed to have stilled, holding its breath. 10 feet! Raven stopped, head lowered slightly, testing the air. Cole could hear the horse breathing, could smell the clean animal scent of him, could feel the power coiled in that body like a spring wound tight. Still, he didn't move. 5 more minutes passed. Maybe 10. Time had stopped meaning anything specific, just existed as a thing that happened while other things happened within it. Raven took another step, close enough now that if he wanted to strike, Cole would have no time to react. Close enough that one kick from those hooves would end this in a way that couldn't be undone. Cole kept breathing, kept existing, kept taking up his small piece of space and asking nothing. The horse lowered his head and sniffed at Cole's boot. A long, thorough investigation, then moved to his leg, his side, his shoulder. Mapping this strange human through scent and proximity, trying to understand what made him different from all the others. Cole let him. Didn't flinch when warm breath hit his neck. Didn't react when teeth that could easily tear flesh instead just explored the fabric of his shirt with surprising gentleness. Just sat there being present, being honest, being nothing more or less than what he was. A man who wanted nothing from this horse except to share space with him. Raven completed his investigation and stepped back. Not far, just a few feet. Then, in a move that shocked everyone watching, the stallion lowered himself to the ground and lay down in the dirt, facing Cole, maybe 8 feet away. A collective gasp rose from the crowd. In all the time they'd been watching, through dozens of challengers and countless hours, nobody had ever seen Raven lie down. He was always standing, always alert, always ready to fight. But here he was, lying in the dirt like a normal horse, watching Cole with eyes that held something different than rage or fear. Something closer to interest, or maybe recognition. They stayed like that as the sun dropped lower and the shadows grew long. Two creatures sharing space, asking nothing, offering nothing except presence. Finally, as the light turned gold and evening began its approach, Cole stood up. Slowly, carefully, telegraphing every movement. Raven's head came up, ears forward, tracking him. Cole walked to the gate, stopped, looked back at the horse. Tomorrow, he said quietly. Not to the crowd, not even really to Raven, just saying it out loud to make it real. Then he left the corral. The crowd erupted in confused conversation. Some were angry. They'd waited for violence and gotten meditation instead. Others were thoughtful, sensing they'd witnessed something unusual even if they couldn't name what. A few were already leaving, disappointed, wanting their money back from whatever bets they'd lost. Cole ignored all of it, walked past them to where Evelyn stood near the house, still watching him with that unreadable expression. "That wasn't the challenge," someone called out. "He didn't ride the horse." "No," Evelyn agreed. "He didn't. So he failed." "No," she said again. "He didn't fail either." She turned and went into the house, leaving the crowd to sort out their confusion without her help. Cole followed Carlos to the barn, aware of eyes on his back, of whispered conversations about what they'd just seen. "That was the damnedest thing I've ever witnessed," Carlos said once they were out of earshot. "And I grew up in a town where a man kept a pet mountain lion that he walked on a leash. Will she let me try again tomorrow?" "Try what? Sitting in the dirt? I think she'd let you do that every day, if you wanted." Carlos studied him. "But that's not what you're asking. You want to know if she'll let you actually try to ride him." "Eventually, when he's ready." "And when will that be?" "I don't know. Could be days, could be weeks. Could be never." Cole leaned against the barn wall, suddenly exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical work. "But I have to find out." Carlos nodded slowly. "Then I guess you're staying a while." "I guess I am." That night, Cole lay in his bedroll under stars that seemed close enough to touch and thought about a horse that had chosen to lie down in the presence of a human for the first time anyone could remember. Thought about what that meant, what it suggested about trust and choice and the space between fear and connection. He thought about Evelyn too, about the weight she carried trying to run a ranch alone while waiting for an answer to a question she maybe didn't want answered. About her husband who'd died trying to fix something that could have waited, driven by pride that wouldn't let him admit defeat. And he thought about himself. A man who'd spent 3 years running from anything that felt permanent, who'd chosen emptiness over risk because emptiness was safe, and risk had already cost him too much. But lying in the dark with the sound of the creek in his ears and the memory of a black horse choosing to rest near him, Cole felt something shift. Not dramatically, not like a revelation or a moment of clarity, just a small movement in his chest, like ice beginning to thaw. Maybe some things were worth staying for. Maybe some risks were worth taking. Maybe broken people and broken horses could find something in each other that looked enough like healing to matter. He fell asleep to those thoughts and dreamed of running through tall grass under an endless sky. Whether as man or horse, he couldn't tell. And for once, the dreams didn't turn to nightmares. Dawn arrived with this kind of clarity that only comes after storms. The air so clean, it almost hurt to breathe. Cole woke before the sun cleared the horizon, that old military habit still embedded in his bones after all these years. He lay still for a moment, listening to the world wake up around him, birds calling from the cottonwoods, cattle moving in distant pastures, the creek running lower now but still carrying the memory of rain. His body ached in places he'd forgotten about, the result of sitting motionless against fence rails for however long he'd been in that corral yesterday. Hours, probably. Time had stopped meaning much while he'd been focused on simply existing in the same space as a horse that had hurt so many men. He rolled out of his bedroll and stretched, working the stiffness from his shoulders and back. Dust nickered softly from where she was hobbled, a sound of greeting rather than demand. He checked her over out of habit, ran his hands down her legs, picked her hooves clean of debris. The routine centering him, preparing him for whatever came next. What came next arrived in the form of Jimmy, walking toward his camp with 2 cups of coffee steaming in the cool morning air. "Carlos sent me," Jimmy said, handing over one of the cups. His voice was rough, like he didn't use it much and had to warm it up each time. "Said you'd probably be awake and might need this before the show starts." "Show? You caused quite a stir yesterday." Word spread. "We got people coming in from 3 counties over, wanting to see the man who sat with the devil horse." Jimmy settled himself on a rock, cradling his coffee with both hands. "Some think you're crazy. Others think you're running a con. Few think you might actually be onto something. What do you think?" Jimmy was quiet for a while, staring into his cup like it held answers he'd been searching for. When he finally spoke, his voice was even rougher than before. "I think sometimes the bravest thing a man can do is nothing at all. Just be still when everything in him wants to run or fight or prove something." He looked up, eyes meeting Cole's. "I think you did something yesterday that most men can't do. You stopped trying to win." Cole drank his coffee and didn't respond. There wasn't much to say to that kind of honesty, except to honor it with silence. They finished their coffee as the sun climbed higher, painting the valley in shades of amber and gold. By the time they walked back to the main buildings, a crowd had already gathered, bigger than any Cole had seen so far. Maybe 50 people lined the fence, talking in excited voices about what they'd heard, what they expected to see, placing bets on outcomes they couldn't possibly predict. Evelyn stood near this corral gate, arms crossed, looking less than pleased about the turnout. She caught sight of Cole and walked over, jaw set in a way that suggested she'd been dealing with foolishness all morning and was about done with it. "Half these people think you're going to perform some kind of miracle today," she said without preamble. "The other half think yesterday was luck, and you're about to get yourself killed. I've had 3 different men offer to pay me extra just to watch you try again." "What did you tell them?" "That this isn't a carnival, and they can keep their money." She studied his face, looking for something. "You don't have to do this. Yesterday was enough to prove whatever needed proving." "What did it prove?" "That someone finally understands what I've been waiting for." Her voice softened slightly. "That's worth more than the challenge, worth more than the money. You could walk away right now and you'd still be the only person who got it right." Cole looked past her to the corral, where Raven stood watching the crowd with wary eyes, ears swiveling to track different sounds. The horse looked tense in a way he hadn't been yesterday, agitated by all the human energy focused in his direction. "I'm not walking away," Cole said, "but I'm also not doing this for them." He gestured at the crowd. "They want a show. They're going to be disappointed." Something that might have been a smile touched the corner of Evelyn's mouth. "Fair warning, disappointed people get mean sometimes, especially when they've traveled a long way and bet good money. I'll risk it." She nodded once, sharp and final, then raised her voice to address the crowd. "Listen up. The man's going in, but there's no guarantee anything's going to happen. Could be like yesterday. Could be different. Either way, you keep quiet and you stay back from the fence. Anyone who disturbs what's happening in there answers to me personally." A few grumbles rose up, but died quickly under the weight of her stare. Evelyn Cross might be a woman alone on a frontier ranch, but nobody who'd watched her run this place for 3 years doubted she'd back up every word she said. Cole walked to the gate. Carlos appeared beside him, carrying a canteen. "Might be in there a while again," Carlos said. "Stay hydrated, and if things go wrong, they won't. If they do, don't try to be a hero. Just get out. That horse can hurt you faster than you can react, and pride's a stupid reason to die." Speaking from experience? Always. Carlos handed him the canteen. "Go on. That animal's waiting for you." Cole entered the corral and heard the gate close behind him with that same too loud sound of metal on wood. The crowd noise died down to whispers, then silence. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Raven stood in the same spot as yesterday, near the water trough. But his body language was completely different. Head high, ears back, muscles bunched and ready. All the calm from their previous encounter had evaporated under the pressure of spectator energy and expectation. This was going to be harder. Cole didn't walk to the fence and sit down like before. That had worked once because it was unexpected, genuine, honest. Repeating it would be performance, and the horse would know the difference. Instead, he moved slowly to the center of the corral and simply stopped, standing loose and easy, hands at his sides, making himself present, making himself available, making no demands. Raven tracked the movement, nostrils flaring. The stallion took 2 steps forward, then stopped, testing, uncertain. The man had been safe yesterday, but today felt different. The air was charged with human attention, and that made everything more dangerous. Cole closed his eyes. It was a risk, turning off one of his primary senses while standing in a corral with an animal that could kill him. But he needed Raven to understand that this wasn't about watching for threat or preparing for violence. It was about trust, about making himself vulnerable and hoping that vulnerability would be recognized and respected. The crowd stirred, confused whispers building. What was this fool doing? Cole kept his eyes closed and focused on breathing, slow and steady. In through the nose, out through the mouth, the rhythm of it like waves on a shore, constant and unchanging. Around him, the world continued, wind touching his face, sun warming his shoulders, the smell of dirt and horse and distant grass. He heard Raven move. Hoofbeats in dirt, getting closer, close enough that he could feel the displacement of air as the horse circled him. Once around, then twice. The stallion moving with that particular precision animals have when they're investigating something they don't quite understand. Still, Cole didn't open his eyes, didn't reach out, didn't do anything except stand there breathing and trusting that this would either work or it wouldn't, and whatever happened was meant to happen. He felt breath on his neck, warm and curious, then on his shoulder, his arm. The horse was close now, close enough that one strike would end this. But Cole's instincts, honed by war and survival and 3 years of staying alive through situations that should have killed him, told him the violence wasn't coming. Not now, not here. Something soft touched his hand. Velvet soft. Raven's muzzle, investigating his fingers with the kind of gentle curiosity that seemed impossible from an animal that had brutalized 47 men. Cole opened his eyes. The horse was right there, close enough that he could see his own reflection in those dark eyes, close enough to count individual hairs in the stallion's mane. Raven didn't pull away when Cole's eyes opened, just stood there, breath matching breath, two living things sharing space and finding it less terrible than expected. Slowly, moving like he was underwater, Cole raised his hand, not to grab or control or demand, just to offer. Palm up, fingers relaxed, an invitation rather than a command. Raven looked at the hand, looked at Cole's face. Some calculation happening behind those eyes, some decision being weighed that humans couldn't fully understand because they'd lost the language animals still spoke fluently. Then the horse lowered his head and rested his muzzle in Cole's palm. The crowd gasped. Even through his focus, Cole heard it, that collective intake of breath that comes when people witness something they didn't think was possible. But he didn't let it distract him, kept his attention on Raven, on the warm weight of the horse's head in his hand, on the trust being offered so carefully it felt like holding something made of glass. They stood like that for a long time. How long, Cole couldn't say. Time had stopped meaning anything again, replaced by this moment that existed outside normal measurement. Just a man and a horse, connected by nothing more than mutual decision to be present with each other. Finally, Raven pulled back. Not in fear or rejection, just ending the contact on his own terms. The stallion moved away, back to the water trough, and drank deeply while Cole stood in the center of the corral, feeling like he'd just run a marathon despite not having moved more than a few feet. He walked to the gate. Evelyn opened it without a word, face unreadable. Cole stepped through and kept walking, past the crowd that was already buzzing with conversation, past the barn, all the way to the creek where he could sit down on a fallen log and let his hands stop shaking. Because they were shaking. Had been the whole time, adrenaline and fear and something bigger than both flooding through his system. He'd done dangerous things during the war, led charges, held positions against overwhelming odds, made decisions that got men killed or kept them alive. But this felt different. This felt like touching something fundamental about what it meant to be alive and conscious and capable of connection. "You all right?" He looked up to find Evelyn standing a few feet away, hands in her pockets, studying him with concern that seemed genuine rather than polite. "Yeah," he said, though his voice came out rougher than intended. "Just needed a minute." That was remarkable. You know that, right? It was just standing there. No. She moved closer, sat down on the log beside him. It was more than that. It was understanding what needed to be understood. My husband spent a year trying to break that horse with ropes and saddles and determination. You spent 2 days and barely moved, and Raven came to you, chose to trust you. Doesn't mean I can ride him. Maybe not. Maybe that's not even the point anymore. She was quiet for a moment, watching water flow over rocks. I've been thinking about what you said, about how I already know the answer, but I'm not ready to admit it. And? You're right. I don't want Raven ridden. Don't want him broken or trained or turned into something useful. I want him to stay exactly what he is, wild and free and unbent. She looked at Cole. But I couldn't just say that. Couldn't admit that my husband died trying to do something that shouldn't be done. That his whole approach was wrong from the start. So I created this challenge, this impossible task, hoping someone would prove it was impossible. Hoping someone would show me that strength isn't about breaking things. It's about knowing when to leave them whole. And now? Now I think I can stop waiting for permission to believe what I already know. She stood up, brushing dirt from her pants. The challenge is over, Cole. You didn't ride him for 10 minutes, but you did something more important. You showed me what I needed to see. What about the money? She laughed, but it was a sad sound. Keep it. Use it to start somewhere new. Buy land. Build something. You've earned it more than anyone who actually tried to ride him. I don't want the money. Then what do you want? It was a good question. One Cole had been avoiding asking himself because he wasn't sure he'd like the answer. He looked at the ranch buildings visible through the trees, solid and permanent in a way that terrified him. Looked at the creek flowing past, going somewhere but always staying here at the same time. Looked at Evelyn, standing in morning sunlight with the weight of the world on her shoulders and still standing upright. I don't know yet, he admitted, but I think I'd like to figure it out here, if that's all right with you. Something shifted in her expression. Surprise, maybe? Or hope? Or just the small relief of not being alone for a while? I could use another hand around here, she said carefully. Pays not much. Room and board mostly, but the work's honest and there's always more of it than we can handle. I've done ranch work before. Then you're hired, assuming you can handle Carlos's cooking and Jimmy's silences and my general stubborn nature. I think I can manage. They walked back to the main buildings together, not talking, just being companionably present. The crowd had mostly dispersed, disappointed or satisfied or confused depending on their expectations. A few lingered, asking Carlos questions about what they'd witnessed, whether the challenge was really over, what it meant that someone had finally succeeded without technically succeeding. Carlos just shrugged and told them to ask Miss Cross, knowing full well she wouldn't explain anything to anyone because some things didn't need explaining. The days that followed settled into a rhythm that felt both foreign and comfortable to Cole. He woke before dawn, helped with morning chores, worked whatever needed working, fence repair, cattle checks, barn maintenance, the endless list of tasks that kept a ranch functioning. The work was hard but honest, using his body in ways that felt productive rather than destructive. Jimmy taught him the particular quirks of this ranch, which fence sections needed replacing before winter, where the cattle liked to congregate when storms came through, how to read the creek levels to predict flooding. The older man didn't talk much, but what he said mattered, stripped of unnecessary words until only truth remained. Carlos provided the balance, talking enough for both of them, telling stories about growing up in a town where nothing ever happened except the one time everything happened, explaining the politics of the valley and who was feuding with who and why it all mattered less than people thought. And Evelyn ran it all with quiet competence, making decisions that needed making, handling problems that arose, keeping the whole operation moving forward through sheer determination and refusal to quit. Cole watched her work and understood why the ranch hadn't failed despite being too much for one person. She simply wouldn't let it. He visited Raven every day, not to try riding him, not to push for progress, just to be present. Sometimes he sat in the corral while the horse grazed. Sometimes he stood and talked about nothing important, the weather, the work he'd done that day, thoughts that surfaced and needed speaking even if nobody was really listening. Sometimes he just existed in the same space, both of them content to share air and sunlight and the simple fact of being alive. Gradually, Raven's tolerance shifted into something closer to acceptance. The horse would approach now, curious about what Cole was doing, investigating his pockets for treats that weren't there, occasionally resting his head on Cole's shoulder in a gesture that felt almost affectionate. 2 weeks passed this way, then 3. The crowd stopped coming once word spread that the challenge was over and nothing dramatic was going to happen. Life at the ranch returned to its normal rhythm of work and survival, and small moments of peace between hardships. One evening, Cole was repairing a section of fence near the north pasture when Evelyn rode up on her mare, a solid bay named Copper, who'd been with her since before her husband died. "Need help?" she asked, swinging down from the saddle. Wouldn't turn it down. They worked together in the fading light, replacing rotted posts and restringing wire. The job went faster with 2 people, but Cole suspected she'd come out here for reasons beyond efficiency. She'd been doing this work alone for years. She knew how to handle it. "You're good at this," she said after a while, testing the tension on a wire strand. "Ranch work. You've definitely done it before. Grew up on a farm in Missouri. Small operation, nothing like this, but big enough to teach the basics." He hammered a staple into place. "Left when I was 17 to join up. Thought I'd see the world, do something important." "And did you?" "Saw parts of the world I wish I hadn't. Did things that seemed important at the time, but probably weren't." He moved to the next post. "Lost the farm while I was gone. Parents couldn't keep it running without help, sold it to pay debts. Came back after the war and found strangers living in the house I grew up in. That why you've been drifting? Part of it. The other part is that drifting's easier than staying. Staying means getting attached. Getting attached means having something to lose again. Evelyn was quiet for a moment, hands still on the wire. I understand that. After Thomas died, I thought about selling this place, starting over somewhere new where nothing reminded me of him, where I could just exist without the weight of what was and what should have been. Why didn't you? Because running away doesn't actually solve anything. The weight comes with you. So I figured if I was going to carry it anyway, might as well carry it here, where at least the work means something. They finished the fence as full dark settled in, working by feel and familiarity in the last of the twilight. When the final wire was secured, they stood back and looked at their work. Solid and straight. Something that would hold through winter and keep the cattle where they belonged. Thank you, Evelyn said, for staying, for helping, for not being another person who tried to fix things by breaking them first. I'm not fixed, Cole said. Just so we're clear. I'm still carrying plenty of weight I don't know what to do with. I know, but you're carrying it here. That's enough. They rode back to the ranch in comfortable silence, arriving to find Carlos had made dinner, some kind of stew that was mostly edible if you didn't think too hard about what was in it. They ate together at the long table, the four of them, passing bread and talking about tomorrow's work and whether the weather would hold. It felt almost like family. Or what Cole imagined family felt like for people who hadn't lost theirs to time and distance and decisions that couldn't be undone. After dinner, he walked out to check on Dust one last time before bed. The mare was content in her corral, hip-shot and drowsing, living her best life now that she wasn't walking endless miles toward nowhere in particular. Raven was visible in the adjacent corral, a shadow in shadows, standing alert despite the hour. Cole detoured over, leaning on the fence rail. "Hey there," he said quietly. "You doing all right?" The horse's ears swiveled toward his voice, but Raven didn't approach, just stood there acknowledging the greeting in his own way. "I've been thinking," Cole continued, speaking more to himself than the horse, "about what comes next, about whether it's possible to build something new when everything you've built before turned to dust, about whether someone like me deserves a second chance at having a life instead of just surviving." Raven moved closer, stopping at the fence rail across from where Cole stood, close enough to touch if either of them reached out. "I think I want to try," Cole said. "Want to stay here and work and maybe figure out what it means to be part of something again. But I'm scared. Terrified, actually, because everything I've ever been part of ended badly, and I don't know if I can survive that again." The horse just listened, dark eyes reflecting starlight, patient in the way animals are when humans need to work through things out loud. But I guess being scared isn't a good enough reason to run anymore. And this place? Cole looked back at the ranch house where lamplight spilled from windows, where people he was starting to care about were finishing evening chores and settling in for the night. This place feels like it might be worth the risk. He reached out and ran his hand down Raven's neck, feeling muscle and warmth and the steady rhythm of the horse's breathing. Raven leaned into the touch slightly, accepting it, maybe even welcoming it. "Tomorrow," Cole said. "If you're willing, I'd like to try something." The horse didn't answer because horses didn't speak human languages, but something in his stillness suggested understanding, or at least acceptance of whatever came next. Cole returned to his camp by the creek, now more permanent than temporary, with a proper tent and organized gear, and the kinds of small comforts people accumulated when they stopped moving long enough to need them. He lay in his bedroll looking at stars through the tent opening and thinking about trust and risk, and whether it was possible to become someone new while still carrying everything you'd been. He didn't have answers, but for the first time in 3 years, he was starting to believe that answers might exist, and that staying in one place long enough to find them wasn't the same as giving up. The next morning dawned clear and cold, autumn beginning its slow transition toward winter. Cole went through his usual routine, checked dust, helped with morning chores, ate breakfast with the others. Carlos noticed him moving with particular purpose and raised an eyebrow, but didn't ask questions. Jimmy just nodded, understanding written in the lines of his weathered face. Evelyn watched from the porch while drinking her coffee, something unreadable in her expression. After breakfast, Cole walked to Raven's corral alone. The horse was waiting, alert and watching, ears forward with interest rather than aggression. Cole opened the gate and entered, closing it carefully behind him. No crowd this time, no expectations, just a man and a horse, and the question of what they might become together. He approached slowly, hand extended, and Raven came to meet him halfway. They stood together for a long moment, Cole's hand on the horse's neck, feeling the powerful heartbeat beneath skin and muscle. "I know you've been hurt before," Cole said quietly. "Know you've been pushed and pulled and demanded from. I'm not here to do any of that. I'm just here to see if maybe we can trust each other. If maybe we can try this together, as partners instead of master and beast." Raven's ears flicked, tracking the words if not understanding them completely. Cole moved his hand to the horse's withers, applying gentle pressure. Raven shifted but didn't pull away. More pressure, slight and asking rather than demanding. The horse took a step sideways, allowing Cole to position himself alongside. Then, moving with careful deliberation, Cole slowly leaned his weight against Raven's side. Testing. Asking permission. The horse tensed but held still, muscles bunched and ready, but choosing not to react. Cole stayed like that for a full minute, just leaning, sharing weight, asking the horse to bear it. Then he stepped back, releasing all pressure, offering praise in the form of gentle strokes along Raven's neck. They repeated this process, pressure and release, weight and withdrawal, until the horse's tension began to ease, until Raven started understanding that this human's weight didn't mean pain or control. Just meant connection, partnership. By the time the sun reached its zenith, Cole had progressed to draping himself across Raven's back, stomach down, arms dangling on either side. The horse walked in slow circles around the corral, adjusting to the weight, learning that carrying it didn't have to mean losing freedom. They worked like this for hours. No rushing, no forcing, just patient, incremental progress built on trust that was earned rather than demanded. As evening approached and long shadows stretched across the corral, Cole stood beside Raven one more time. His whole body ached from the careful work, muscles trembling with fatigue and tension. "One more thing," he said to the horse. "If you're willing." He gathered himself, took a breath, and in one smooth motion, swung his leg over Raven's back and settled into a seated position. The horse froze. Every muscle went rigid. Cole could feel the power coiled beneath him, the potential for explosive violence that had sent 47 men flying. But he didn't try to hold on, didn't grab mane or squeeze with his legs or do anything to control or contain, just sat there, balanced and present, hands resting lightly on his own thighs. "It's okay," he murmured. "You're okay. We're okay." Raven's ears swiveled back, listening. The tension didn't leave entirely, but it shifted slightly, becoming something less like rage and more like uncertainty. Cole counted seconds in his head. 10, 20, 30. Raven took a step forward, then another, walking slow and careful, testing this new reality where a human sat on his back but didn't try to force him anywhere. They moved around the corral like that. One step, pause, another step. Learning together what this could be when it wasn't about dominance or submission. When it was just two beings figuring out how to exist together in a way that didn't require either of them to break. By the time Cole finally slid down from Raven's back, his legs were shaking so badly he almost fell. But he'd stayed mounted for over 15 minutes, and the horse had never once tried to throw him. He leaned against Raven's shoulder, overwhelmed by what they'd just done, by what it meant, by the simple fact that trust could actually build into something real. "Thank you," he whispered into the horse's mane. "Thank you for trying." When he finally left the corral, he found all three of them waiting, Evelyn, Carlos, and Jimmy, standing by the fence with expressions that ranged from amazement to satisfaction. "You did it," Carlos said, grinning wide. "You actually rode the devil horse." "We did it," Cole corrected, "Raven and me. Together." Evelyn stepped forward, and for a moment Cole thought she might hug him, but she just held out her hand for a shake. Professional, respectful. But her eyes were bright with something that might have been tears. "I knew it was possible," she said. "Just needed the right person. Someone who understood that riding isn't about winning, it's about trust." Cole took her hand, felt the calluses and strength in her grip, and understood that something had changed between them too. Not romance, nothing so simple or dramatic. Just recognition. Two people who'd both been broken, finding that broken pieces could still fit together in ways that worked. That night they celebrated with whiskey Carlos had been saving for something worth celebrating. They sat on the porch while stars wheeled overhead and told stories that got less believable with each drink, laughing at jokes that weren't that funny but felt hilarious anyway because joy was rare enough to embrace when it appeared. Cole sat with his back against a post, watching these people who'd somehow become his people, and felt something in his chest that had been frozen for 3 years finally begin to thaw. He was staying. Not just for a while, really staying, building something instead of running, taking the risk that it might all fall apart because the alternative, endless drifting, had stopped being survival and started being just another kind of death. Tomorrow would bring more work, more challenges, more opportunities to fail or succeed or land somewhere in between. But tonight, under stars that had witnessed countless human struggles and would witness countless more, Cole Ryder let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, he'd found a place worth calling home. And in the corral nearby, a black horse stood watching the humans celebrate, understanding in his own way that something important had shifted, that the man who'd sat so still and asked for nothing had given him back something precious. The choice to trust, the freedom to connect, the knowledge that wildness and partnership weren't opposites, but could exist together in the same powerful heart. The weeks that followed weren't easy, though Cole had stopped expecting easy a long time ago. What they were was real, filled with the kind of work that left you exhausted but satisfied, the kind of days that blurred together but somehow added up to something that felt like progress. Winter arrived early that year, sweeping down from the mountains with cold that made your bones ache and wind that cut through layers of clothing like they weren't even there. The ranch shifted into survival mode, checking cattle twice daily to make sure none were stuck in snowdrifts, breaking ice on water troughs every morning, hauling feed to pastures that were buried under white. Cole threw himself into the work with a focus that surprised even him. He'd spent 3 years doing the minimum required to survive, but here he found himself caring about things that didn't directly affect his own well-being. Whether the cattle had enough shelter, whether the barn roof would hold under the weight of snow, whether Evelyn was getting enough sleep or just running herself into the ground, trying to do everything. She was doing the latter, of course. Old habits died hard, and she'd been carrying this place alone for so long that accepting help felt like admitting weakness. But gradually, as the days accumulated into weeks and Cole proved he wasn't leaving at the first sign of difficulty, she started to delegate, started to trust. "I need you to ride out to the north pasture," she said one morning over coffee, her breath making clouds in the cold kitchen. They'd all started taking breakfast together now, a habit that had formed without anyone deciding it should. "Check the fence line. We lost 3 head last winter to a break we didn't find until spring." "I'll go," Cole said. "Take Raven?" She paused, cup halfway to her lips. They'd been careful with the horse since that first successful ride, not pushing, not assuming anything. Cole had ridden him a handful of times, always with the same patient approach, always giving Raven the choice to participate or refuse. "If he's willing," she said, "but take Copper as backup. That's rough country, and if something goes wrong, I know, I'll be careful." Carlos looked up from his plate. "I'll go with you. 4 eyes better than 2 for finding breaks." They set out an hour later, bundled against the cold, riding through a landscape transformed by snow into something that looked like it had never been touched by humans. Raven moved beneath Cole with a confidence that had grown over their time together, no longer the explosive powder keg of fury, but a partner who'd learned that carrying a rider didn't mean losing himself. The fence line ran for miles through country that rose and fell with the contours of the land, following creek beds and avoiding rocky outcrops where posts couldn't be driven. They found the first break around noon, a section where snow load had pulled down 3 posts and left wire sagging into useless loops. "Could have been worse," Carlos observed, dismounting to inspect the damage. "We got materials back at the barn. Can fix this in a couple hours if the ground's not frozen solid." They marked the location and continued on, finding 2 more breaks before the day started its slide toward evening. By the time they turned back toward the ranch, both men were half frozen and completely exhausted, but there was satisfaction in knowing the problem had been identified and could be solved. "You're good at this," Carlos said as they rode through the gathering dusk. "Ranch work. Better than most hands I've seen come through here." "Told you I grew up on a farm." "That's not what I mean. Lots of people know how to do the work. Few actually care whether it gets done right." Carlos adjusted his seat, easing some ache in his back. "You care. That's different. Cole didn't know how to respond to that, so he just rode in silence while his breath frosted in the air, and Raven's hooves crunched through snow that was already starting to freeze into tomorrow's ice. When they reached the ranch, full dark had fallen, and lamplight spilled from the house windows in a way that made Cole's chest tight with something he couldn't quite name. Longing, maybe. Or belonging. Or the fear that came with wanting something badly enough that losing it would hurt. Evelyn met them at the barn, concern written in the lines around her eyes. I was starting to worry. Found what you needed? 3 breaks, Carlos reported. Nothing we can't handle. Cole here's got a good eye for trouble spots. That's so. She looked at Cole with an expression he was learning to read, approval mixed with something warmer, something that made him nervous and hopeful at the same time. Come inside. Dinner's ready, and you both look half dead from cold. The meal was simple but hot, and they ate with the kind of hunger that came from spending a day fighting weather and geography. Jimmy had stayed behind to handle the local chores, and he listened to their report with his usual quiet attention, occasionally asking questions that got to the heart of what needed doing next. After dinner, while Carlos and Jimmy argued good-naturedly about the best way to set fence posts in frozen ground, Evelyn gestured for Cole to follow her to the porch. They stood in the cold looking out at a valley transformed by moonlight on snow into something that belonged in a dream. I want to talk to you about something, she said, voice careful in a way that made Cole's shoulders tense. About the ranch. All right, I can't pay you much. You know that. What I've been giving you is barely wages, more like charity, disguised as employment. She turned to face him, moonlight catching the angles of her face. But if you're planning to stay, really stay, I'd like to make it official. Partnership. You'd own a piece of this place. Help make decisions. Have a stake in whether it succeeds or fails. Cole felt like the ground had shifted beneath him. Why? Because I can't do this alone anymore. Because you've proven you care about more than just a paycheck. Because... She stopped, seemed to be wrestling with words. Because I trust you. And trust is worth more than money. What about Carlos and Jimmy? They're good men. Best hands I've ever had. But they work for wages and they're happy with that arrangement. You're different. You're building something here. I can see it in how you work, how you plan ahead, how you look at this place like it matters. It does matter. Then say yes. Be my partner. Help me turn this ranch into what it could be instead of just what it is. Cole looked out at the snow-covered valley, at the barn and corrals and fence lines that stretched into darkness. Thought about 3 years of running, of refusing to put down roots because roots could be torn up, and that hurt worse than never planting them at all. But he was tired of running, tired of protecting himself from pain by refusing to feel anything else either. Yes, he said, I'll stay. I'll be your partner. Her smile was small but genuine, relief and something else crossing her face. Good. We'll draw up papers in the spring when we can get to town. Until then, you have my word, and I have yours. That'll have to be enough. It's more than enough. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, breathing clouds of frost and listening to the sounds of the ranch settling down for the night. Inside, Carlos started playing a harmonica badly, making Jimmy laugh, a rare sound that was worth hearing. Can I ask you something? Evelyn said. About the war. You don't have to answer if you don't want to. Cole tensed. What about it? Jimmy has nightmares. I hear him sometimes, through the walls, wakes up shouting things I can't understand. And you got that same look he has, like you're seeing things the rest of us can't. She was quiet for a moment. Does it get better? The memories, the weight. He thought about lying, about giving her the answer that would comfort rather than the truth. But she'd offered him partnership, and that meant honesty, even when it was hard. I don't know, Seth, he said. Some days are easier than others. Some nights I sleep fine, and some nights I'm back there, seeing things I can't unsee, hearing things I can't unhear. But being here helps. Having work that matters helps. Having people who... He stopped, not sure how to finish that sentence. Having people who care about you, whether you deserve it or not, she offered. Yeah, that. She reached over and took his hand. Not romantically, just human contact between two people who understood what it meant to survive things that should have killed you. They stood like that until the cold drove them inside.
where warmth and lamplight and the sound of badly played harmonica reminded them both that life continued despite everything that tried to stop it. The winter deepened and the work continued. They fixed the fence breaks, hauled feed, dealt with a difficult birth when one of the cows went into labor during a blizzard and needed help. Cole learned the rhythms of this place, the way seasons and weather and animal needs dictated everything, the way you could plan all you wanted, but nature would do what it wanted regardless. He also learned Evelyn, learned that she was stubborn but not inflexible, that she carried grief like a stone in her pocket but didn't let it crush her, that she laughed rarely, but when she did, it was genuine and unguarded. Learned that her competence came from necessity rather than choice, that she'd rather be doing almost anything else, but this was what needed doing, so she did it. They fell into a pattern that felt almost like partnership already, even without the papers to make it official. She'd mention something that needed attention and he'd handle it, or he'd spot a problem and bring it to her and they'd solve it together. No power struggles, no ego battles, just two people working toward the same goal because the goal mattered more than who got credit for achieving it. Carlos noticed, of course. Carlos noticed everything. "You two are dancing around something," he said one day while they were mending tack in the barn. "Just thought you should know it's obvious to everyone except maybe you." "We're partners," Cole said. "Business partners." "Sure you are. And I'm the king of Spain." Carlos grinned. "Look, I'm not saying you got to do anything about it, just saying that when two people look at each other the way you two do, everyone else can see it even if you're both pretending it's not there. There's nothing, I know, not yet, maybe not ever, but there could be, if either of you got the courage to admit it." He went back to his mending. Just something to think about. Cole did think about it, more than he wanted to admit, because Carlos was right. There was something building between him and Evelyn that went beyond partnership or friendship, something that made his chest tight when she smiled, that made him want to solve her problems before she even knew they existed, that made the idea of leaving this place physically painful to contemplate. But he didn't know what to do with those feelings. Didn't know if she felt the same or if he was just projecting hope onto friendship. Didn't know if he deserved to want something good after everything he'd done during the war. So he did nothing, just worked and waited and tried not to think too hard about possibilities that might never materialize. Spring came slowly that year, winter fighting for every day before finally retreating into memory. Snow melted into mud that made everything miserable for a few weeks before the ground dried and green started pushing up through brown. The cattle moved back to pastures they'd been kept from during winter. Calves were born in numbers that exceeded expectations, and the ranch began to feel less like a survival operation and more like something that might actually thrive. One morning in early May, a rider appeared on the road to the ranch. Not unusual. People still drifted through occasionally, though the challenge was long over and most had stopped bothering. But this rider was different, younger, well-dressed, riding a horse that cost more than most men made in a year. He introduced himself as Richard Cross, Thomas's younger brother, and said he'd come to discuss the ranch. Evelyn's face went carefully blank when she saw him. Cole, standing nearby, felt tension radiate off her like heat. "Richard," she said, tone neutral. "It's been a while." 3 years, Richard agreed, dismounting with practiced ease. "Since the funeral. I would have come sooner, but business kept me in San Francisco." His eyes swept over the ranch buildings, assessing, calculating. "The place looks good. Better than I expected, given the circumstances." "What circumstances?" "A woman running it alone. No offense, Evelyn, but this is hard work for anyone. For someone without help." "I have help," she interrupted, gesturing to Cole and the others. "Good help. The ranch is doing fine." "I'm sure it is. But that's actually why I'm here." Richard pulled a document from his saddlebag. "Thomas's will. It's been through probate, and there are some complications. Legal issues about ownership and inheritance. I think we should discuss them inside." Cole watched Evelyn's jaw tighten, watched her hands curl into fists before deliberately relaxing. "Fine. Inside." She led Richard to the house while Cole, Carlos, and Jimmy exchanged looks. "That man's trouble," Jimmy said quietly. It was the first unprompted observation Cole had heard from him in weeks. "Can see it in how he sits his horse. Everything's a calculation." "What do you think he wants?" Cole asked. "The ranch," Carlos said flatly. "Why else would he show up after 3 years with legal documents? He's going to try to take it from her." They were right. An hour later, Evelyn emerged from the house looking like she'd been punched. Richard followed, expression satisfied in a way that made Cole want to hit him. "Thank you for your time, Evelyn," Richard said, mounting his expensive horse. "I'll give you a week to consider my offer, but I'd advise you to take it. The legal fees alone to fight this will bankrupt you, and the outcome isn't guaranteed. This way you walk away with something." He rode off without waiting for a response, leaving Evelyn standing in the yard looking smaller than Cole had ever seen her. "What happened?" he asked, moving to her side.
"He's challenging the will. Says Thomas promised him half the ranch years ago, has letters to prove it, and since there's no clear documentation otherwise, he might win. Even if he doesn't, the legal battle will cost more than I have." Her voice was flat, empty. "He offered to buy me out, enough money to start somewhere else. Said it's the fair solution." "That's not fair, that's theft dressed up in legal language." "Doesn't matter what it is. If I fight and lose, I get nothing. If I take his offer, at least I get something." She looked at Cole with eyes that held the kind of defeat he recognized from his own mirror. "I'm tired, Cole. So tired of fighting. Maybe it's time to accept that some things can't be won." "No." The word came out harder than he intended. "No. You don't give up, not after everything you've survived. Not after building this place into what it is." "I didn't build it alone." "Exactly. You have partners now, people who have a stake in this. Let us help." "How?" "With what? I can't pay legal fees, can't fight a battle that's already decided by whoever has more money." Cole thought about the box in his saddlebag. The $5,000 Evelyn had tried to give him after he'd ridden Raven. Money he'd refused because he didn't want victory defined by currency. Money he'd kept anyway because she'd insisted, saying it was his whether he used it or not. "You can," he said, "because I'm giving you that $5,000. Use it for lawyers. Use it to fight. Use it to prove that this ranch belongs to the person who bled for it, not the person who shows up with paperwork 3 years late." "Cole, I can't." "You can. Because we're partners. Because this is my fight now, too. Because I'm not watching you lose something that matters over money when I have money I don't even need." He grabbed her shoulders, made her look at him. "Fight, Evelyn, please. Don't let him win by making you too tired to try." Something shifted in her expression. The defeat didn't disappear, but it made room for something else. Anger, maybe. Or determination. The thing that had kept her going through 2 winters alone and 47 men trying to break her horse. "All right," she said. "All right. We fight." The legal battle that followed was uglier than Cole had imagined. Richard had resources and connections, lawyers who knew how to twist words until truth became negotiable. But Evelyn had something better. Years of ranch records showing her sole ownership, testimony from neighbors who confirmed Thomas had never mentioned his brother in relation to the property, and a will that, while not perfectly clear, favored the surviving spouse in the absence of other claims. The $5,000 hired lawyers good enough to match Richard's, and the case dragged through summer into early fall before finally reaching a judge who had the sense to see through the manipulation. The ruling came down in October. The ranch belonged to Evelyn Cross, sole proprietor, and Richard's claim was dismissed with prejudice. He had 30 days to appeal and chose not to, apparently deciding that cutting his losses was better than throwing more money at a fight he was clearly losing. When the news arrived, Evelyn sat down on the porch steps and cried. Not from sadness, but from relief so profound it had to go somewhere, and tears were as good a place as any. Cole sat beside her, not saying anything, just being present the way he'd learned to do with Raven. Sometimes presence was enough. Sometimes it was everything. "Thank you," she said when the tears finally stopped. "For the money, for the fight, for not letting me quit when quitting seemed easier. You would have done the same for me." "Would I?" She looked at him with red-rimmed eyes. "I'd like to think so, but I'm not sure I'm that good a person." "You are. You just don't see it because you're too busy being it." She laughed, watery but real, and leaned her head on his shoulder in a gesture that felt both comfortable and terrifying in its intimacy. They sat like that while the sun set over the valley and painted the sky in colors that didn't have names, and Cole let himself believe that maybe broken people could build something whole together if they were patient enough and brave enough and willing to try. The partnership papers were drawn up in November, official and legal, splitting ownership of the ranch between Evelyn Cross and Cole Ryder in a way that recognized his investment and commitment. It felt strange seeing his name on documents that meant permanence. that tied him to this place in ways that couldn't be easily undone. Strange, but right. Winter came again, the second one since Cole had arrived, and this time it felt different. Not like something to survive, but like a natural part of a cycle that would repeat endlessly, each iteration bringing new challenges and familiar comforts. The work continued because work always did, but there was joy in it now, the satisfaction that came from building instead of just maintaining. One evening in December, nearly a full year since Cole had first ridden into Dry Creek Valley, he was working with Raven in the corral. Not riding, just being together, the kind of companionship they'd developed over months of patient interaction. The horse had changed, softened in ways that made him accessible to others now, though he still preferred Cole's company to anyone else's. Evelyn came out to watch, leaning on the fence rail with her coat pulled tight against the cold. Cole finished what he was doing and joined her, both of them comfortable in silence that didn't need filling. "You know what I realized today?" she said after a while. "It's been a year since the last challenger tried for Raven. A year since anyone looked at that horse and saw a problem that needed solving through force." Good. People ask me sometimes when they pass through whatever happened to that challenge, the widow and the devil horse, like we're some kind of legend that didn't pan out. She smiled. I tell them the truth, that someone won, just not the way anyone expected. Did I win, though? Cole asked. Because it doesn't feel like winning. Feels more like we all just found what we needed and stopped looking for anything else. Maybe that's what winning actually is. Not defeating something, but finding peace with it. They stood in the cold and watched Raven move through the corral with the confidence of an animal that knew he was safe, that understood the humans in his life didn't want to break him, just wanted to exist alongside him in a way that worked for everyone. I love you, Evelyn said suddenly, not looking at him. Just thought you should know, in case it matters. Cole's heart did something complicated in his chest. It matters. Are you going to say it back or just leave me hanging here feeling like an idiot? I love you too. Have for a while. Just didn't know if I was allowed to. Allowed? She turned to face him. Cole, you're allowed to feel whatever you feel. You're allowed to want things. You're allowed to be happy. The war doesn't own you anymore unless you let it. He kissed her then, there in the cold with snow starting to fall and the ranch settling down for another night. It wasn't dramatic or earth-shattering, just honest and warm and real in the way things rarely were. When they pulled apart, both of them were smiling. So what now? Cole asked. Now we keep going, keep working, keep building, see what comes next. That's it? That's the plan? That's the plan. Unless you've got something better? He thought about it. Thought about all the complicated plans he'd made during the war that had fallen apart the moment they encountered reality. Thought about 3 years of drifting with elaborate strategies to avoid attachment. No, he said. I think your plan's perfect. They walked back to the house hand in hand, leaving footprints in fresh snow that would be covered by morning but existed now, proof that people had passed this way and chosen to stay. Inside, Carlos and Jimmy were playing cards at the kitchen table, arguing about rules they were making up as they went along. They looked up when Evelyn and Cole entered, noted the joined hands, and Carlos grinned wide enough to split his face. Finally, he said, I was starting to think you two were never going to figure it out. Figure what out? Evelyn asked, all innocence. That you're perfect for each other. That you've been building a life together whether you admitted it or not. That some things are worth the risk of getting hurt again. Carlos stood and pulled out a bottle of whiskey they'd been saving. This seems like an occasion worth celebrating. They drank and talked and laughed, the four of them. And somewhere in the warmth of that kitchen, Cole realized he'd finally found what he'd been looking for without knowing he was looking for it. Not victory or glory or redemption, just belonging, just purpose. Just the simple knowledge that tomorrow would come, and he'd face it with people who mattered, doing work that mattered, in a place that had somehow become home. Spring came again, and with it a stranger riding up the road on a horse that looked like it had traveled far. He was young, maybe 22, with the kind of restlessness Cole recognized from his own mirror years ago. The stranger stopped at the fence and looked at the ranch with something like hope in his eyes. I heard there was work here, the young man said. Heard the people who run this place understand things most folks don't. About horses. About people who need a second chance. Cole and Evelyn exchanged glances. She nodded slightly. There's work, Cole said. Hard work. honest work. You willing to do it without asking for anything except a place to sleep and food to eat? Yes, sir, more than willing. Then come on down. Put your horse in the barn. We'll see if you're a fit. The stranger smiled, grateful and nervous, and rode toward the barn where Carlos was already appearing to help with the horse. Cole watched him go and felt something settle in his chest, the cycle continuing. People finding their way here because word had spread about a ranch that took in strays, human and animal, both, and gave them room to heal. You thinking what I'm thinking? Evelyn asked. That we're going to need to build another bunkhouse if this keeps up? That! And also that maybe this is what Thomas was trying to build all along. Not a ranch that broke things, but one that helped them become whole again. Cole pulled her close. This woman who'd offered him partnership when all he deserved was employment, who'd believed in him before he believed in himself, who'd shown him that staying was braver than running and love was worth the risk of loss. Then let's build it, he said. Together, the way it's supposed to be done. They walked toward the house where dinner was waiting and work was waiting and tomorrow was waiting with all its possibilities and challenges. Behind them, in his corral, Raven stood watching with dark, intelligent eyes. The horse that had started this whole thing by refusing to be broken, by waiting for someone who understood that strength sometimes looked like stillness, and victory sometimes looked like surrender. And the wildest things in life were often the ones worth preserving exactly as they were. The sun set over Dry Creek Valley, painting the world in gold and shadow, and the ranch settled into evening with the peaceful confidence of something built to last. Not perfect, never perfect, but real and solid and filled with people who understood that survival wasn't about being the strongest or the fastest or the most determined. It was about being brave enough to trust, to connect, to build something new from the broken pieces of what came before. It was about recognizing that we're all a little wild, a little damaged, a little lost, and that maybe that's exactly what we need to be to find each other in this vast and unforgiving world. And in the finding, in the staying, in the daily choice to show up and try again despite everything that says we shouldn't, that's where life actually happens. Not in the dramatic victories or crushing defeats, but in the quiet moments between where hope grows like grass through snow and love builds like stones into walls that shelter us from storms we can't control. Cole Ryder had learned that lesson the hard way, but he'd learned it, and that made all the difference.